Workshop. My name's Darren, and today we're going to have a look at filling in holes in wood where you may have had a screw before or a nail, or you've had some sort of accident, you've accidentally made a hole or a gouge. We're not really going to cover dents so much. Dents are often easily fixed by just wetting them, letting the water soak in and going over them with something hot like an iron. That causes the water to expand, of course, and brings the fibres up with it. So that's a quick and easy way to do dents. We're going to focus on holes, and what I've done is I've drilled a series of holes in this piece of wood and labelled them with how I'm going to fill them to try and hide the hole basically, or get rid of the hole. So I've drilled a series of 5mm holes in this board, and the reason for that is every test should theoretically be the same. Every hole's the same size to start with, and I've labelled them all. Most of them I'm going to fill with sawdust, with cyanoacrylate, epoxy, wood glue. I'm going to try water-based varnish and oil-based varnish. Sometimes using your finish as a hardener can work well. And of course, then it blends in with the finish better at the end because it's the same finish. We're going to do a plug, which is often a great way to go. And down the end I've got wax. Now normally you wouldn't fill a hole like this with wax. Wax is better suited to, say, you've just driven a brad nail into something and you've got the divot behind the nail. A little bit of rub of wax of the right colour is a good way to hide that. But we'll do it here as well, just as a comparison. All right, let's get on with it. For the sawdust, quite often what you get is fairly large pieces. We don't want large fibres of sawdust because they will make it look like chipboard when it's finished. So we're going to use this fella and just give the fibres a bit of a whiz. Chop them up a little bit smaller. We're not trying to make flour, otherwise our fill's going to go rock hard. We're after just fine little fibres is what you're looking for. Oh, I think that'll do. All right, let's have a look at that. Here I have two examples of sawdust. Basically before it went in this little blender, I think it's a, I don't know, herb grinder, coffee grinder. I've only used it for grinding up sawdust and stuff, but yeah, basically this is what it looked like before I put it in, and this is what it looks like after. So I'm seeing, let's see if we can zoom in and have a better look. Sorry, it's shaking a bit. I've had to go handheld on this one. This pile over here has got some large chunks in it, like that. You can see here that this pile is much finer. And so this is the sort of consistency we're after. We still want some fibres to it, like I said. We don't want it to look like flour, but at the same time, we're not making chipboard and we don't want to have big chunks in it. So, focus. Something like that is really worth having. You can always use the one in your kitchen and clean it. After all, it is just sawdust. Okay, so I've got my sawdust all sorted out. I'll be using that one there. That stuff there can go on the floor to be swept up later. All right, now the plug. We're going to use a drill bit that looks like this to cut out a plug. So you take a piece of scrap wood, you drill down into the wood, and that leaves a little piece inside that you can then snap off with a screwdriver, or if you've done a few of them, you can run the whole thing through a bandsaw and they'll all come out. But yeah. So you end up with a little plug. And now the advantage of the plug here is because you've drilled it from the surface of a piece of wood, you end up with face grain on the top. So it's far more likely to be hidden. You can also choose where about you drill your hole. So if the area we wanted to repair had a bit of colour running through it, like that there, you could drill at that point. If, like this one here, it's in a fairly plain point, it just misses the coloured portion, it's in a fairly plain portion of the wood, then you would perhaps drill a hole here and take that. And that's what we're going to do. My hole or my damage is a nice neatly drilled 5mm hole. Of course that won't usually be the case, it'll normally be something ragged, so you'll probably want to drill it out as part of the repair anyway. But we're going to have to do this today because that's a 5mm hole, and the smallest plug I have, oh, lovely, 6.2. That's a handy measurement, 6.2. What I'll do now is I will drill that out to 6mm and then tap in our plug. Just putting a tiny bit of glue in the hole, like I said, not very much, we don't need a lot. A nice little pointy glue stick like this is great for that. Sometimes it can help to use a magnifying glass to identify the grain direction on something small, and then take the mallet you made and just tap that down into the hole. Now it's still proud, that's okay. We're going to use a flush cutting saw later to come back and take that off. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to do the plug first, is now we've got plenty of time for the glue to dry. There we go. So soon we've got the PVA glue nice and ready. Let's mix up a little blend of PVA and sawdust. We're also going to put a little bit of glue in the hole first, so we're not trying to cram it all down there into a dry hole. That just doesn't work well. Tends to be very difficult to get it in far enough if that's the case. So we've got a little bit of glue down in the hole there. Alright, and now we're going to make a blend here with the PVA and some of this sawdust. Start with that. You can always add more later. This is going to shrink. That's one of the things to keep in mind. So we will want it to be slightly proud of the surface when we get it in there. The higher the sawdust to glue ratio, the less shrinkage there's going to be, but you're still going to get shrinkage. But also, the higher the sawdust to glue ratio, the more difficult it is to get it down in the hole. If the hole is big enough, you can put the sawdust in first and then put the glue in. But the PVA wood glue doesn't really seep down like cyanoacrylate would. Okay, so we've got like a putty. Now you can see here, it's like a putty consistency. That's what we want. So I'm going to just take some of that. You're going to get some around the edges. That's not avoidable really, but we can be careful and not get it too far. You could also put a piece of blue tape here with a hole cut out just to protect the surface if you're worried about getting glue around the edge. A good thing to keep in mind because it does make it difficult to finish. But on the other side you're going to have glue here anyway, so maybe you want it to be consistent in that area. Alright, let's go back. Just take away the excess, but like I said before, we're going to try and leave it proud of the surface. So we just want to take the excess from the surrounding areas, not the hole itself. We'll leave that, that'll all sand down. Okay, so that's that one done. Okay, onto the cyanoacrylate, and it's nothing flash, it's just a little bit of Selleys Quick Fix super glue. We're going to use that. Handy in these little containers sometimes, as long as they don't go off before you use them. I don't think any of you will be new to super glue. I don't need to tell you not to get it on your fingers or in your eyes, do I? Alright, again, this is probably easier with a bigger hole, but this is the hole we've got, so this is the hole we're going to work with. And we're just going to sprinkle some of that in. Give it a bit of a press down. Now something we can do here, because our sawdust is dry, is give that a bit of a press with the back of a drill bit. Now while this is less likely to shrink, we still want it to protrude a little bit from the surface. So we've got something to sand back. But we're going to put a little bit of glue in there first and then sprinkle more on top. So here we go. Bit of cyanoacrylate. We'll just let that soak down. Alright, now we're going to sprinkle some more sawdust on top. Right, so that's that for that. Okay, I've just got myself some 2-part epoxy in here. Now to be honest, I don't expect a lot from this. I've never used this before, and that's because I don't think it'll work well. But I thought while we're experimenting, let's have a look and see how we go. I'm just going to see if I can get some down into the hole as well. Let's mix some sawdust in with that. It's probably too much sawdust now, but anyway, I've got to be quick because this is only 5-minute araldite. So let's start getting it into the hole. Yeah, I already don't like this, but anyway, let's see how we go. I'm just going to clean up around that. Alright, that's got the epoxied sawdust in there. So now I've got myself some water-based polyurethane and some oil-based polyurethane or varnish. So we're going to give those a bit of a try. You would pick whichever one of these you were going to finish your surface with, so as when you do sand everything down and start using this, of course it should all match in. Don't use water-based to fill the hole and then do the whole thing in oil-based, or vice versa, especially vice versa, because the water-based won't soak in through the oil. Alright, so I've got myself some water-based polyurethane. Again, I'm going to put a little bit of in the hole. Actually, I'm going to put a fair bit in the hole because that's just drinking that right up. It's a very thirsty hole. I might do the same trick we did before with the drill bit now and try and squish it down there and then put the polyurethane over the top to hold it. This should be easier than trying to mix it, I think. Okay, so I've done the same thing. I've put the sawdust in the hole, I've compacted it down with a drill bit. Now we're going to put some more polyurethane on the top so that can soak down into there. Oh yeah, that drinks it right in. And then we'll sprinkle some more sawdust over the top of that once this is shrunken in a bit. The sawdust underneath is swelling more than the glues. You can actually see it raising. You probably can't from there. Yeah. Alright. Tiny bit more polyurethane. And then a little bit of sawdust on top of that. A bit of press down. Alright. And we'll leave that to dry. Alright, we'll do the varnish or oil-based polyurethane the same way. Alright, now, so we're just going to sprinkle some of this over the top. Let that dry into there. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is this sort of wood filler. Now this one's called Radiata / Baltic, so Baltic pine or Radiata pine. This is Radiata pine, so we should be good. This should make a nice blending, hard to see kind of fill. Let's give that a try. I drilled a new hole just for it. So as you can see, I've obviously used a fair bit of this before. I do think it's fairly handy stuff. So let's just squish that into the hole there. One thing about this with it being pre-mixed like that is it's very fast. It does have a tendency to crack, but there you go. I'm just going to pack that in a little bit and then go over it again. Just try and work it down into that hole a little bit. We don't have to necessarily get to the bottom of the hole. There we go. Yeah, that's good now, I think. We want to be able to create a little rise on it. If we pull it off flush like that, you'll always get a little divot at the far side that you scraped it away from, or at least I always do. And there's a couple of different ways around that. You can put on a lot of excess and then sand that back off, and that is often the best way, sort of, perhaps not quite that much, but perhaps something like that and sand it back. Or, and this is going to gross some people out, you can get a little bit of spit, a little bit of human saliva on your finger, and you can rub over it, and that just smooths it out a little bit. Alright, this is my trusty container of wax sticks, and here I have various different coloured sticks of wax for filling wood. So let's have a look. We've got that's supposed to be our pine, as is that one. They're both supposed to be pine. That might be nice for the darker areas. Yeah. I think this one. Now, this, like I said, isn't really the kind of hole you would normally fill with wax. But let's give it a try anyway. I could melt it. I could get my hot gun and I could melt some in there. But this rubbing, it seems to work too. At least it certainly does in the sort of holes I normally fill with it. And you can see after a while of rubbing, the layer of wax is flush with the surface. Come over to here and have a look at these shelves. I'll show you what I mean, where the wax is really in its own and what it's for. I've used brad nails to put these fascias on, and so let's get in close. We can see these little holes here left by the brads. That one, the brad's a little bit proud, so it might not work. But the idea is you take your wax stick and you just rub it. This works better on dark timber, I must admit. It's easier to match the stick in. But yeah, you do the same thing we did over on the other board. You just rub it in there and that fills that hole. And it's a lot more effective on little things like this, the wax. So don't judge the wax too harshly by our other experiment. This is what it's really for. It's the next day and we're going to basically sand everything down and do our comparisons. But before we do, we need to trim off this excess bit of plug here. So a little trick that I like to use. Probably 3 million other people on the planet already know this trick, but anyway. We just take a little snip out of this piece of cardboard there. And that was probably a much bigger hole than we needed, but that's okay. We're going to use that now. We're going to use our flush cut saw. Mine's got a side for softwood, which I'm sure you can see there, and a side for hardwood. And that's pine, so softwood, so we'll start using that. And the whole purpose of this piece of paper here is it stops the teeth from touching the surface of the wood and scratching it. Now, being a flush cut saw, it shouldn't be sharp on that side anyway, but metal rubbing against soft wood, you know it's going to leave a mark. Okay, so there's the bulk of our plug cut off and ready to go. So now we're just going to give the whole thing a sand and then decide which one looks the best. Now hopefully the marker pen has gone in deep enough in the wood that we won't sand that out. Okay, let's give this piece of wood a sanding and see which one of these was the best. The first one is the CA glue, the cyanoacrylate, aka super glue. That's come out too dark, I think. And we've got a couple of bubble holes that have popped up into it, which make it even more obvious. You could sand further down until you get those bubbles out, but then of course you're sanding down the level of your wood as well because it's already flush with the surface. So yeah, look, CA glue's got its places, but I think that perhaps in this instance it's not the best way to fill a hole. Alright, let's move along to epoxy. I'm very surprised with the epoxy. It does look too dark, but it's come out very smooth, very even. It was easier to get in there than I expected. A little bit of pressing, and a little bit of it sort of seeped into the surrounding wood in the process, which may affect the application of a finish. But look, if you don't mind the fact that it's obvious and you can see it, it's actually a really good fill. It's hard, it's dense, it's yeah, very solid. I'll give it that. Alright, moving on to the wood finishes. Surprisingly, they're still too dark. Mind you, once we've treated the surface with polyurethane, maybe that'll be a different thing. Maybe their no will disappear a little bit more, but at the moment, yeah, they look too dark as well. Alright, let's move on to the plug. I mean, we can see that the plug's there, but it's the winner. It's certainly the closest match in the colour. And if you were more careful to take a plug from a place that really matched well, then yeah, that would look like a perfect match. And there's nothing making you have to use a round plug either. If you're happy cutting out a little rectangle or a little triangle and cutting the same out of the surface here, you could have plugged that with a triangle. Alright, the wax, we can see that on the end there. Yeah, like I said, this isn't really what wax is for. It's pretty obvious, we can see it. It's not very strong. If we were to press it with something, it would just push straight back out of it. Oh, that's probably a little bit thick. Yeah, that's still very soft, obviously. And it's not going to take a finish. The finish is going to bead straight back off that. But as I mentioned before, it's not really what we're using wax for anyway. Alright, coming down here, wood filler. Wood filler seems to be on par with the plug actually. Alrighty, and last but not least is our fill with the PVA wood glue. Now, as far as the other glues go, this one's come out quite well. I think it actually looks the nicest of the three glues. See if we can get, look at all three glues in. It's a toss-up between the epoxy and the PVA, to be honest. And you're probably always going to have PVA on hand, so that's certainly a good way to fill the hole. That's worked well. It's very hard, durable. Alright, let's get some finish on the surface and we will do a comparison once it's been finished. I'm going to take over the hole with polyurethane. It's going to paint, but it's going to finish with water-based poly. We really need to compare that one to water-based poly. So we use water-based poly there. Mine's covered with a comparison. Maybe that should be a whole base of silver. Alright, the rest we will do water-based. Alright, so that's better. I think just one coat should do the trick. I think the wood, not a piece of furniture, just a test. Right, there we go. Single coat of water-based polyurethane. There we go. I don't tell me wrong about the wax. Interestingly enough, it's not being off the wax like I would have expected. Instead, it is sitting on top of the wax. I'll just see the buttons there. Alright, it's probably too now. But there we go. That's polyurethane, right? There's now a coat of finish over the whole thing. For the majority of it, it's water-based polyurethane. But you can see here is the oil-based polyurethane. Almost touch dry, just slightly tacky, but it's not going to change colour too much for a long period of time now, so that's pretty much it. So if we look around really of all of these different holes and all the different ways of filling, I'd have to say that my number one is the plug. I think that does a really good job. Likewise, the filler actually has come out quite well, the wood filler. So I'll just grab that one again in case you're interested. That one was this Interagram wood blend, just down here, Radiata and Baltic. And I often use these brands as well. I just don't have these in pine, but mahogany and maple. Believe it or not, I blend these two together to make Jarrah in various different amounts. Sometimes Jarrah's darker than this, sometimes it's lighter than this, but yeah, you can make a few sort of dark wood colours out of these two. So that's what I use there. Of the holes filled with sawdust, I like the water-based varnish or water-based polyurethane the best. I think that's the closest match for colour. As for strength, definitely the glues. All three of the glues have gone very hard, and the sawdust with PVA and sawdust with epoxy, in my opinion, are the better looking of the two. That brings us to the end of another video. I think really if we're going to take anything away from that experiment, it's that plugs and wood filler work best, certainly on pine. Dowels, of course, would also be very good. You can, in a pinch, use sawdust, it will work, but you're better off, like I say, with plugs. So well worth investing in a set of these plug cutters. And if you can find it to match the timber you're using, worth having some wood filler around as well. Okay, have a great day. I will catch you in the next video. Bye for now.